Subscribe to incredible detective stories and enjoy watching. 3 a.m. in a psychiatric ward has a specific weight. It's a heavy, pressurized silence that presses against your eardrums. You don't hear the absence of noise. You hear the suppressed chaos of 200 minds momentarily stilled by sedatives and exhaustion. I've worked the night shift at St. Jude's Center for Behavioral Health for 15 years. You stop noticing the smell of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee eventually. What you never stop noticing is the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes in darkened rooms. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I'm a senior night charge nurse. I'm 52 years old, divorced, and I have a mortgage on a small house I rarely see in daylight. I am not a detective. I am a professional observer of human breakage. I ensure the meds are dispensed, the restraints are secure, and the paperwork matches the reality of the ward. Usually it's a quiet job, until last Tuesday. That night started like any other. The handover from the evening shift was rushed, a blur of clipped sentences about patient agitation levels and medication adjustments. By midnight, the ward had settled into its usual nocturnal rhythm. The only sounds were the hum of the HVAC system and the squeak of my soft, soled shoes on the linoleum as I made my rounds. St. Jude's is an old building, a Victorian-era structure retrofitted with modern security. It's a maze of long corridors and heavy, magnetically locked doors. The high-security wing, Unit D, is where we keep the ones the state doesn't know what else to do with. It's where we kept Elias Thorne. Elias was our celebrity monster. High intelligence, profound antisocial personality disorder, and a history of violence that read like cheap fiction. He was charming in the way a cobra is charming right before it strikes. He was currently housed in Isolation Room 4, a bare cell with a bolted-down bed and a camera protected by reinforced glass. At 3:15 a.m., I was at the nurses' station in Unit D, nursing lukewarm coffee and updating logs. Dr. Marcus Albright, the newly appointed head psychiatrist, was supposed to be on call in his office down the hall. Albright was brilliant, arrogant, and openly despised by half the staff and all the patients. He had a way of looking at you like you were a particularly interesting stain on a slide. I needed Albright to sign off on a sedative change for a geriatric patient in Unit A. I called his office line, no answer. I waited 10 minutes and tried again. Still nothing. It wasn't like him to ignore a call during a shift. His ego demanded he always be in control. A prickle of unease, familiar to anyone who works in these places, started at the base of my neck. I took the master keycard and walked down the dimmed corridor to his office. The door was shut. I knocked softly. "Dr. Albright, it's Arthur. I need a signature." Silence. I swiped the card. The lock clicked open with a heavy metallic thud. I pushed the door open. The desk lamp was on, casting a warm pool of light over a scene that will stay etched in my mind forever. Dr. Albright was sitting in his high, backed leather chair, facing away from the door. It looked for a moment like he was asleep, head tilted back. But the angle was wrong. Too sharp. I stepped closer, the air suddenly tasting metallic. There was a letter opener, a heavy, silver thing he used to gesture with pompously during meetings, buried to the hilt in the side of his neck. The blood had already stopped flowing, pooling darkly on the expensive Persian rug he'd insisted on bringing in. His eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling with an expression of utter, frozen surprise. I didn't scream. You don't scream in my line of work. It upsets the patients. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and pulled the door shut. I went straight back to the nurses' station and locked the unit down. Then, with a hand that wasn't quite steady, I called the police. While I waited for the sirens to cut through the night, a single, chilling thought surfaced through the shock. Just before I found the body, I had done my 300 a.m. visual check of the high security monitors. I remembered looking specifically at Isolation Room 4. Elias Thorne had been sitting on his bed, legs crossed, staring directly into the camera lens with a small, knowing smile. He hadn't moved. He couldn't have moved. But as I stood there in the sterile light of the nurse's station, waiting for the world to intrude on our closed ecosystem. I knew with absolute certainty that Elias Thorne had somehow just committed murder from inside a locked, monitored cage. The police arrived in a swarm of blue lights that painted the ward walls in frantic, shifting patterns. The lead detective was a man named Miller, a wary-looking homicide veteran with nicotine stains on his fingers and eyes that had seen too much urban decay. He treated St. Jude's like a zoo where the cages had momentarily failed. They cordoned off the hallway leading to Albright's office. Forensics technicians in white bunny suits began their slow, methodical dance around the body. I sat in the staff break room, nursing a fresh cup of terrible coffee, answering Miller's questions. "Tell me about the relationship between Dr. Albright and the patient, Elias Thorne," Miller asked, his pen hovering over a small notebook. "It was toxic," I said, choosing my words carefully. Albright saw Elias as a challenge, a puzzle to be solved to prove his own brilliance. He pushed him. Intense therapy sessions, provocative questioning. Elias hated him. He made no secret of it. 2 days ago, Elias told me that Albright was a cancer that needed excising. Miller raised an eyebrow. A direct threat. With Elias, everything is a threat and nothing is. But yes, the animosity was palpable, so Thorne had motive. Plenty of it. Now explain to me how he got out of a maximum security isolation room that requires 2 swipe cards and a retinal scan to open. Walked 50 feet down a hallway patrolled by you, killed a man, and went back inside without triggering a single alarm. He didn't, I said flatly. Miller stared at me. Excuse me. Physically, he didn't get out. I checked the logs before you arrived. The door to Isolation 4 hasn't been opened since 8:00 p.m. yesterday for his evening meds. The magnetic seals were intact. Then we have a ghost problem, Miller muttered dryly. Or, I leaned forward, we have something much worse. We have Elias Thorne. They took the security footage. All of it. The feed from Elias's room was played back on a monitor in the security hub. There he was, from midnight until 3:30 a.m. Elias Thorne sat on his bed. He read a book for an hour. He paced for 20 minutes. Then he sat and stared at the camera. He never left the frame. The timecode in the corner spooled out the seconds relentlessly. It was the perfect, unbreakable alibi. The police were baffled. They started looking at the staff, which was standard procedure. Had someone let him out and then doctored the logs? Impossible. The electronic logs are backed up instantly to an off-site server. Had someone else killed Albright and tried to frame Elias? That seemed more likely to them. But I knew these patients. I knew Elias. The sheer theatricality of it, the impossible nature of the crime, it had his signature all over it. He was an architect of chaos. He didn't just want Albright dead. He wanted to prove that our systems, our walls, our sanity, were inferior to his will. I finished my shift in a daze. When the morning sun hit the parking lot, the world felt wrong. I drove home, the image of Albright's surprised eyes stuck in my head. I tried to sleep but couldn't. The paradox kept spinning in my mind. A locked room, a monitored man, a brutal murder just down the hall. I realized then that I couldn't just leave this to Miller and his team. They saw walls and locks. I saw the ecosystem. I knew the currents that ran beneath the surface of St. Jude's. If Elias did this, he didn't do it with his hands. He did it with his mind, using the asylum itself as his weapon. I got up, showered the fatigue away, and decided that for the first time in 15 years, I was going to take my work home with me. I had to understand how a man in a glass cage could reach out and kill. When I returned for my next shift, the atmosphere in the hospital was brittle. The day staff were whispering in huddles that broke apart whenever a supervisor walked by. The official narrative was still undefined, but the rumor mill had already convicted Elias Thorne. Physics be damned. Detective Miller and his team were still on site, looking more frustrated than before. They had grilled everyone. My colleagues on the night shift, Sarah, a young nurse barely out of school, and Ramirez, a burly orderly whose cynicism rivaled my own, had been interrogated for hours. I went to the security hub first. The regular guard, a man named Henderson who spent most of his shifts doing crossword puzzles, looked relieved to see a familiar face. "They've been running that tape of Thorne's room on a loop," Henderson whispered, gesturing to the main monitor where the police technicians were working. "They can't find a seam. It's continuous. No cuts, no jumps." I stood behind the technicians, watching Elias on the screen. He was just sitting there, radiating smugness even in black and white. "Can I see the footage from the hallway camera? The one outside Albright's office?" I asked one of the techs. He glanced at Miller, who shrugged. "Show him. Maybe he'll see something we missed in the wallpaper." They pulled up the feed. It showed the long, gray corridor of Unit D. At 3:15 a.m., my figure walked into the frame, paused at the door, entered, and then quickly exited a minute later. Before that, for 3 hours the hallway was empty. "See," Miller said, chewing nicotine gum furiously. "Nobody went in, nobody came out until you found him. The killer must have been waiting inside the office before Albright got there." "Albright arrived at 10:00 p.m., I said. "I let him in through the main ward doors. He went straight to his office." "Are you saying someone hid in his office for 5 hours waiting to kill him with his own letter opener?" "It's the only logical explanation, Mr. Penhaligon. Unless you believe in astral projection, it was logical but it felt wrong. Albright's office was obsessive-compulsive tidy. There were no closets deep enough to hide a person comfortably, no nooks. I left the security hub and went to Unit D. The police tape was still up around the office door. I walked past it to Isolation Room 4. The glass was thick, soundproof. Elias was inside, lying on his bunk, hands behind his head. He saw me and sat up slowly. He walked to the glass. He didn't speak. We couldn't hear each other anyway, without the intercom activated. He just pressed his index finger against the glass, right over where my heart would be on the other side, and tapped twice. Tap, tap. A chill went down my spine. It was a message. "I got him. You know I got him." I went to the nurse's station and pulled Albright's recent files. I wasn't supposed to, but the chain of command was broken, and nobody was watching me. I looked through his notes on Elias. They were disturbing. Albright wasn't just providing therapy. He was engaged in psychological warfare. He was trying to break down Elias's narcissistic defenses using highly confrontational techniques. He had been digging into Elias's childhood, excavating traumas that Elias had buried deep. One note from 3 days ago stood out. "Subject is showing signs of severe decompensation under pressure. His facade of control is cracking. He is becoming desperate. I have him cornered. He knows he cannot outsmart me this time. Say arrogance. Fatal arrogance." Albright thought he had Elias cornered in a mental cage, never realizing that Elias was just biding his time in a physical one. I needed to talk to someone who knew the layout of this place better than the architects. I needed to talk to the old maintenance chief, Saul. Saul had been at St. Jude's for 40 years. He knew where every pipe ran, where every wire terminated. I found him in the basement boiler room, a cavernous space that always smelled of oil and heat. Saul was wrenching on a valve, grumbling to himself. "Arthur," he nodded, not stopping his work. "Hell of a thing upstairs. The fancy doctor got himself stuck. Saul, I need to know something. Is there any way at all, to bypass the security locks on Isolation 4 without leaving a digital trace?" Saul stopped wrenching and wiped his greasy hands on a rag. He looked at me with shrewd, watery eyes. "You think the psycho did it? I know he did it. I just don't know how." Saul leaned against a cold pipe. "Digitally, no. Those systems are air-gapped and redundant. You'd need the hand of God to wipe those logs. What about physically? A crawlspace? A ventilation shaft?" He shook his head. "The isolation rooms are concrete boxes. The vents are 6 inches wide with welded grates. You couldn't fit a cat through there." He paused, frowning. "There is one thing, though. An anomaly." "What kind of anomaly?" "The wiring for Unit D. When they retrofitted the security system back in '98, they cut corners. Instead of running new conduit for everything, they piggybacked some of the camera feeds onto existing coaxial bundles that run through the ceiling plenum above the hallway." So, Saul said slowly. If someone knew exactly where those bundles were in the ceiling, and they had the right equipment, they could theoretically tap into the feed. Intercept it. My mind started racing. Intercepting the feed wouldn't open the door. It wouldn't kill Albright, but it was a crack in the armor. "Thanks, Saul," I said, turning to leave. "Arthur," he called out. I turned back. "Be careful. You're a good nurse. Don't try to be a hero." The things that live in this building, some of them are older than the bricks. I took his warning to heart. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted the noise in my head to stop. The noise of an impossible puzzle demanding a solution. The investigation dragged into its third day. The police were focusing on the intruder hiding in the office theory, which I knew was dead wrong. It was neat, it was physical, and it didn't involve impossible alibis. They were busy interviewing former patients with grudges and checking Albright's personal life for jilted lovers. Meanwhile, the atmosphere on the ward was deteriorating. Elias's presence, even locked away, was like a low-grade poison seeping through the walls. The other patients in Unit D were agitated, sensing the shift in power dynamics. They knew the king had killed the usurper, and they were restless. I spent my shifts doing my job mechanically, my mind elsewhere. Saul's information about the wiring bundles was the only thread I had. If the camera feed could be intercepted, could it be altered? I'm not a tech expert, but I know enough. To alter a live feed without a glitch is incredibly difficult. To create a seamless loop of a man sitting still for 3 hours required preparation and access. I started watching my colleagues. Who had the technical know-how? Who had the opportunity? Ramirez, the orderly, was strong but tech illiterate. He still used a flip phone. Sarah, the young nurse, was sharp. She spent her breaks on her smartphone, scrolling through social media. She was good with the electronic charting system. But did she have the depth of knowledge to hack a closed-circuit security system? It seemed unlikely. Then there was the day shift supervisor, Mrs. Gable. An efficient, severe woman who viewed patients as inventory and staff as necessary inconveniences. She had access to everything, but her motivation was non-existent. She hated Albright, true, but she hated disruption more. I went back to the security hub on my lunch break. Henderson was eating a sandwich over his crossword. The police techs had gone for the night, leaving the systems running on autopilot. "Henderson, mind if I look at the playback one more time?" I asked. "Be my guest, Art. I'm sick of looking at that smug bastard's face." I sat at the console and rewound the footage of Elias's room to midnight. I watched it again and again. I wasn't looking at Elias this time. I was looking at the environment. The bed bolted to the floor. The stainless steel toilet in the corner. The thick glass of the observation window, reflecting the dim light of the room. I watched for an hour of real time. My eyes were burning. Then, I saw it. It was minuscule. If I hadn't been looking for a glitch in the matrix, I never would have seen it. At 1:42 a.m. on the timecode, there was a tiny flicker in the reflection on the observation glass. A light source outside the room, in the hallway, shifted for a fraction of a second. I paused, rewound, played back in slow motion. There, a shadow passed across the glass, but the hallway camera at 1:42 a.m. showed an empty corridor. My heart began to thud. The footage was altered, but not in the way we thought. The feed of Elias in his room wasn't a loop. It was real. He really was in there the whole time. The lie was the hallway camera. Someone had edited the hallway footage to make it look empty when it wasn't. Someone had walked down that hall, past Elias's room, entered Albright's office, killed him, and walked back. And whoever did it had wiped themselves from the record. This changed everything. Elias wasn't the killer. He was the distraction. He was the flamboyant, impossible suspect meant to keep everyone looking at the wrong thing. But who? And why would they align themselves with Elias Thorne? I went back to Unit D. The hallway felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of ghosts that had been digitally erased. I stopped outside Albright's office. The police seal was broken. They had finished their on-site work. I slipped inside. The rug was gone, taken for evidence. The desk was dusted with fingerprint powder. I sat in Albright's chair, trying to see what he saw in his final moments. He would have been working, focused on his notes. The door would have opened. He might have turned, annoyed at the interruption. And then, I looked at the desk surface. Under the dusting powder, I saw faint scratches near the edge. Like something heavy had been clamped there recently. I looked up at the ceiling. Acoustic tiles. Standard stuff. But directly above the desk, one tile was slightly askew. Just a millimeter or two out of alignment with the grid. I stood on the chair and pushed the tile up. It lifted easily. I poked my head into the plenum space between the ceiling and the floor above. It was dusty, filled with silver HVAC ducts and bundles of cabling, and there, resting on top of a duct right above the desk, was a small black box with a blinking green LED. A wireless transmitter. The pieces slammed together in my mind, forming a horrifying picture. It wasn't a physical intrusion into the room. It was a technological one. I climbed down, my hands shaking. I knew how it was done. And I knew with sudden, sickening clarity who had done it. The only person arrogant enough to try it, and brilliant enough to pull it off. It wasn't Elias, and it wasn't a staff member. It was Dr. Albright himself. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I sat back down in the dead man's chair, the silence of the office amplifying the chaotic drumming of my heart. Albright, it had to be. The camera trickery. It was too sophisticated for a mere murder. It was a performance. Though impossible, Alibi of Elias Thorne was the center ring, designed to hold everyone's attention, while the real trick happened elsewhere. But why would Albright kill himself? I scrambled out of the chair and went to his file cabinet. The police had emptied it, but I knew Albright's habits. He was paranoid. He kept backups. Under the bottom drawer, taped to the underside of the metal casing, I found a thin USB drive. I didn't have a computer with me, so I pocketed it. I had to get to a secure terminal. I went back to the nurse's station. It was 400 a.m. Sarah was dozing in her chair. Ramirez was doing rounds in Unit C. I logged onto the main terminal, my fingers fumbling with my password. I inserted the USB drive. It was encrypted, of course. But Albright was a creature of habit. I tried his birth date. Incorrect. I tried the date of his big promotion. Incorrect. Then I tried something else. The patient ID number of his first major success story, a case he bragged about constantly. The drive unlocked. It contained folders of personal notes, financial records, and a digital diary. I opened the diary to the last entry dated the day he died. It is done. The trap is set. I have pushed Elias to the breaking point, and in doing so, I have pushed myself beyond it. The board is moving to terminate me. They know about the fabricated data in the drug trials. My career is over. My reputation will be shredded. I will not allow them that satisfaction. I will not be a failure in their pedestrian history books. I will be a victim, a martyr to the dangerous minds I tried to heal. And Elias will be my instrument, my unwitting executioner. He thinks he is the puppet master, but he is just another prop in my grand finale. The irony is exquisite. I felt sick. Albright had staged his own murder. The transmitter in the ceiling, it must have been linked to a mechanism. A spring-loaded device holding the letter opener, rigged above his chair. He sat down, activated it, perhaps with a timer, perhaps a remote, and let it do its work. And the camera footage, he must have pre-recorded the Humpty hallway, loop days ago. He had access to the security servers. He set the system to replace the live hallway feed with the loop during the critical window. He knew we would immediately focus on Elias. He knew Elias hated him enough to take the credit, even if he didn't do it. Elias's ego wouldn't allow him to deny committing a masterpiece of a crime. Albright had weaponized Elias's narcissism against him. It was a suicide disguised as an impossible murder, designed to frame a monster and preserve Albright's own twisted legacy. He would forever be the brilliant doctor struck down by the unconquerable psychopath, not the fraud about to be exposed. I sat staring at the screen, chilled to the bone. The intellectual cruelty of it was staggering. Two brilliant, broken minds, locked in a death spiral, dragging the rest of us down with them. I had the truth. But what was I supposed to do with it? If I went to the police, I'd destroy Albright's reputation, just as he feared. But if I stayed silent, the mystery would remain, feeding the legend of Elias Thorne, making him more powerful, more dangerous within these walls. And then there was Elias himself. Did he know? I ejected the drive and walked down the hall to Isolation 4. Elias was awake, standing by the glass. He watched me approach. His expression was unreadable, a calm mask over a churning abyss. I activated the intercom. The static hissed for a moment. He didn't do it, did he? I said, my voice flat in the sterile air. Elias tilted his head. A small icy smile touched his lips. Does it matter, Arthur? His voice came through the speaker, smooth and cultured. The outcome is the same. The board is cleared of a weak piece. He did it to himself, to frame you, to make himself a martyr. Elias laughed softly. It was a terrible sound devoid of humor. Oh, Arthur, you pedestrians are so linear. You think he framed me? No. I let him think he was framing me. I knew what he was planning. I saw the desperation in his eyes weeks ago. I merely encouraged him. I reflected his own impending failure back at him, until he couldn't stand the sight of it. He leaned closer to the glass, his dark eyes boring into mine. He held the blade, Arthur, but I guided his hand. I didn't need to leave this room. I was in his head. I've been in his head for months, rearranging the furniture. He didn't commit suicide. It was an assisted suicide, and I was the physician. I stepped back, horrified. The paradox resolved itself not in mechanics, but in pure psychology. The alibi held because he physically did nothing. Yet, he was guiltier than if he had plunged the steel in himself. You're never getting out of here, Elias, I whispered. I am already out, Arthur, he replied softly, turning his back to me and walking to his bed. I live in your head now, too. I cut the intercom. I walked back to the nurse's station in the oppressive 500 a.m. silence. I had the USB drive in my pocket, the proof of Albright's fraud and his final, desperate plot. I looked at the phone. I could call Detective Miller. I could end the mystery. But then I looked down the hall toward Unit D, where Elias Thorne sat in his glass cage, the undisputed king of this silent kingdom. If I revealed the truth, Albright became a pathetic fraud who killed himself. Elias became just another manipulative patient. If I stayed silent, it remained the perfect, impossible crime. A testament to the terrifying potential of the human mind. I was tired, so very tired. I listened to the hum of the building, the breathing of the sleeping patients, the weight of all the secrets buried in these walls. I took the USB drive out of my pocket. I walked over to the shredder bin, where we disposed of sensitive patient information. I held it over the slot for a long moment. The truth is a heavy burden in a place like St. Jude's. Sometimes the lie is safer. Sometimes the monster you know is better than the chaos of the truth exposed. I dropped the drive into the bin. The plastic clattered against the side as it fell into the darkness. I picked up my lukewarm coffee and went back to my logs. The sun would be up soon. Another night survived. The mystery would remain, a permanent shadow in the halls of Unit D. And Elias Thorne would keep smiling his knowing smile in his glass cage, the man who got away with a murder he never physically committed.